Today, I'll be starting Chapter 3 of the book Transactionalism, an Historical and Interpretive Study by Trevor J. Phillips. Chapter 3 is entitled Transactionalism in Contemporary Philosophy. And I'll be reading through the section on metaphysical tenets, including the position on dualisms, entities, and realities, and epistemological tenets. Transactionalism is in contemporary philosophy. The preceding chapter provided an historical and developmental background to the theory of inquiry and knowledge called transactional. In the present chapter, contemporary transactional theory will be described through a statement of its postulations and characteristics as given by some of its leading exponents. It has already been observed that the transactional movement, as it manifests itself currently in such diverse subject areas as sociology, psychology, biology, physics, economics, and psychiatry, must be credited to the seminal work of John Dewey and Arthur F. Bentley. It is indeed at the confluence of the streams of thought emanating from these two researchers that the fountainhead of contemporary transactionalism must be sought. This gradual union of minds experienced by Dewey and Bentley began as an exchange of correspondence in 1932. It culminated 17 years later in their joint work. In writing this book, a book in which the tenets of what is today known as transactionalism are laid down, the authors desired to accomplish two goals. First, they proposed to expose what they saw as errors and weaknesses of the then widely held theories of logic and scientific knowledge, labeled variously as mentalism, realism, and positivism. Their second goal was to set down directions for using the transactional approach to obtain reliable terms and processes in the theory of knowledge. They regarded this aspect of their undertaking as an attempt to fix a set of leading words capable of firm use in the discussion of knowings and existings. This attempt to develop a theory of knowledge through a search for firm names was to become for Dewey and Bentley an essential prerequisite for describing phenomena. Before attempting to investigate some of the major characteristics of that epistemology, which, as will be demonstrated in the final chapter, has major educational significance, it is appropriate to develop a prefatory section on the transactional metaphysics. Metaphysical tenets, the position on dualisms. Transactionalists are extremely aware, and are at pains to disseminate this awareness, of the temptation to oversimplify issues by resort to exclusive classifications. Transaction itself involves, on the simplest level, the seeing together of what hitherto had been seen in separation, what had been exclusively classified, and held severally apart. Because and by means of reciprocal activity, components are viewed in system, there is interaction, and in very special sense, not merely action and reaction. Transactionalists reject any bifurcation of nature implicit in so many dualisms. It has already been stated that nature is regarded as a unity, in that supernatural or extranatural realms are denied. All that is in nature and of nature. Inanimate matter, living organisms, human beings with intelligence, social institutions, and culture, all are realities of nature. Experiences undergone by humans within this unified system concern themselves, under transactional postulation, with the relationship of the individual to his environment. To experience is to transact. In point of fact, experience is a transaction of organism-environment. The dualities implicit in the earlier self-actional and interactional views fade as the transactional becomes operative. The happenings which affect individuals and the actions they consciously effect in response constitute the domain known as experience. The correcting of the fragmentation of aspects of reality implicit in the transactional point of view subsumes also many other dualisms. Transactionalism goes to great lengths, as has been explained, to assert that much of the artificial bifurcation and obfuscation surrounding problems represented by dualisms, such as soul versus body, mind versus matter, or self versus not self, is caused by the misuse of abstraction. Mind and body, for example, are merely concepts employed to designate certain activities of the human being. It is habits of language which are responsible for the separation of abstractions from the original functionings that gave rise to them, as if they were in some way independent and self-subsistent. In the spirit of Peirce, transactionalism substitutes continuity for discontinuity, change and interdependence for separateness. Dualistic approaches are then, for the transactionalist, futile, providing, as they do, incorrect analyses of the problems they attempt to solve because they encourage abstractions drawn from actual situations within which the behaving individual finds himself. Each party to the dualism must be viewed as an aspect unremoved from persons and situations. It is not a thing in itself, estranged and aloof. Entities and realities. To operate transactionally is to insist that all words such as entity and reality be rejected. Of the former, Dewey and Bentley wrote, "Assumed or implied physical, mental, or logical independence or semi-independence, the semi always vague or evasive, in some part of subject matter under inquiry." Thus, a tricky word, even when not positively harmful, which should be rejected in all serious inquiry. To replace entity, the authors recommended that thing be employed, believing that the very looseness of the application is safer than the insufficiently analyzed rigidities of other words. Attention is drawn by transactionalists to the countless terms in common use which, as Peirce had stated, bar the road to free inquiry and to profitable communication. Treated as entities, these words insert a name instead of a problem. They ignore or certainly fail to communicate the connections and relations among affairs and participators in the cosmos. This is viewed as a transgression because it is only through these connections and relations that the words that name them can perform a worthwhile service. As long as entities such as soul and mind continue to be reified, free inquiry is held to be impossible. Reification is a habit difficult to outgrow. Furthermore, overthrowing the supremacy of soul, mind, or mental is no great advance if these are to be followed by need, IQ, or trait. Transactional procedure is incapacitated when these and similar entities are permitted to enter into language, with the power to interfere, whether to distort or to correct. Of reality, Dewey and Bentley have written, "It may rank as the most metaphysical of all words in the most obnoxious sense of metaphysics, since it is supposed to name something which lies underneath and behind all knowing, and yet, as reality, something incapable of being known, in fact and as fact." A cursory examination of the transactional meaning of fact sheds further light on the movement's metaphysical tenets, for it is preferred over object and entity. By fact is meant the cosmos in course of being known through naming. That is, through the process of designation, which continues throughout inquiry, by organisms themselves among its phases. Dewey and Bentley drew attention to the etymology of the word, derived as it is from factum, something done. It is asserted to be much better fitted for the broad use here suggested than for either of its extreme and less common, though more pretentious applications. On the one hand, for an independent real, on the other, for a mentally endorsed report. When fact is employed, it is to be understood that it relates directly to both the knowing operation and to what is done. Anything known, anything identified, must be viewed along with its knowing and its identifying. Similarly, knowing and identifying are part of the being known and identified. These postulations fail within the same class as that which states that when, for example, the act of chopping occurs, something is of necessity being chopped. When one loves, something is being loved, or when seeing occurs, something is seen. Here are instances of the double-barreled phenomenon described by James and discussed in the preceding chapter. It was Dewey and Bentley's hope that, in fact, they had a word also double-barreled, distinguished sharply from single-barreled terms such as thought, entity, or reality, all of which have acquired from traditional philosophical use the signification of something set over against the doing or acting. This brief excursion may be concluded by comparing the transactional and the interactional types of inquiries in terms of fact. If it be assumed that interactional inquiry comprises interacting elements, themselves separate, independent facts, then transactional inquiry involves fact such that no one of its constituents can be adequately specified as fact apart from the specifications of other constituents of the full subject matter. Fact, finally, is to be accepted with the understanding that instead of inserting gratuitously an unknown something as foundation for the factually known, we are taking the knowledge in full, the knowings, knowns as they come, namely both in one, without appeal to cosmic tortoise, to hold up cosmic elephant, to hold up cosmic pillar, to hold up factual cosmos we are considering. Before concluding the present section, to be followed by an examination of transactionalism's epistemological tenets, and in which the above referenced knowings knowns will be clarified. Mind will be analyzed from the transactional point of view in contrast to the traditionally held mind-body orientation. According to Dewey, the idiomatic or non-technical use of the term mind is much closer to the transactional standpoint than is the technical, which implies isolation or separation from body or matter. The idiomatic usage, however, never denotes anything self-contained, isolated from the world of persons and things, but is always used with respect to situations, events, objects, persons, and groups. So used, mind is an all-inclusive term. It signifies memory. We are reminded. We keep things in mind and bring them to bear upon problems. Primarily a verb or adverb, it indicates how it is possible to deal with actual situations. When regarded as an independent entity, however, able to perform operations devoid of concomitant transactions between organism and environment, it is implicitly assumed that mind is removed from necessary connection with the objects and events, past, present, and future, of the environment with which responsive activities are inherently connected. But in precisely the sense that digestion and respiration are functions primarily of the stomach and the lungs, and it would be absurd to conceive of these systems as operating without the requisite organs, so mind must be viewed as a function of the body. Far from being an isolated, self-acting agent, or even a substance, Mind, transactionally speaking, is a particular type of doing, of activity, on the part of a constantly transacting human being. Naturalist George Eliot Coghill has expressed an instrumental transactional view of mind which helps clarify the subject. Instead of using a substantive mind, I have suggested the use of mentation in the sense of the Latin gerund. By this, without implications with regard to a subject or substantive, all grades of action akin to the mental can be indicated, and the conscious and the subconscious activity can be treated as of the same nature, but on different levels, and not as an essential dualism that is contradictory to the essential wholeness of the organism. Mentation, according to my idea, arises when and where structure and function arise in overt behavior pattern, and develops pari passu with them. By this interpretation, the wholeness of the individual is maintained. It is thus clear why the transactional point of view does not differentiate between, for example, subject and object, mind and body. To do so would lead to ensnarement by the traditional dualistic system already discussed, and to commitment to the reification of activity to independent entities. The transactional procedure, however, is one in which is asserted the right to see together, extensionally and durationally, much that is talked about conventionally, as if it were composed of irreconcilable separates. The following section, which concerns primarily the status of knower in transactional theory, will attempt to shed more light on the transactional approach as it proceeds with its inquiry into inquirers. Epistemological tenets. The relationship between knower and known will be examined in detail below, but it will be obvious from the metaphysical tenets held by transactionalism that the latter does not subscribe to the belief that knowledge is dependent upon the autonomous existence of a knower on the one hand and something to be known on the other. How to reconcile these in order that knowledge be possible became in the history of philosophical thought the overarching question, and although the controversy is no longer much in evidence, Dewey's warning is still worthy of attention. The traditional conception displaced in fact lingers in imagination as a picture of what the world ought to be. Mead's invective delivered against the classical view of epistemology, philosophic riffraff, has been perpetuated by Dewey and Bentley in their respective and joint writings. Bentley, for example, was of the firm belief that with the advent of the new scientific approach to inquiry, epistemology goes to join alchemy and astrology in the limbo of man's crude endeavors. A choice Deweyan epithet characterizes epistemology as that confirmed species of intellectual lockjaw. Utilizing more sober language, the two writers have dismissed the subject as follows. As far as this word directly or indirectly assumes separate knowers and knowns, inclusive of to-be-knowns, all epistemological words are ruled out under transactional procedure. The point that transactionalism makes, of course, is that traditional theories of knowledge are inadequate, for when the decision is made in advance of any knowledge-seeking, of inquiry, that he as knower is condemned to be divorced from the thing he would know, then a problem must obviously arise concerning the resolution of the conflict between object and subject. This dualism, characteristic of many philosophic systems, looks to epistemology for a solution to the problem of how the two substantive agents, the knower and the reality to be known, can be brought into effective union. The transactional view holds that such problems are created when the ontological dualism between knower and known is accepted. For such acceptance denies the naturalistic interpretation of the knowing process. The process is itself seen by this view as a participant in the evolutionary struggle. In fact, the cognitive processes must be regarded as moments in the ongoing endeavor of intelligent organisms to adapt to dynamic physical and biological settings. Next time we'll continue with Chapter 3.